Hi, I'm Brent Hodges with Horizon Prep, and this is part two in a video series on the Educational Records Bureau and the CTP-4 Standardized Assessment. If you haven't watched the first video, I'd highly encourage you to do that first, as this is a jumping off point from that video. The main purpose of this video is to discuss the actual student reports after your student has taken this assessment. Ideally, you'll have your student reports in front of you when going through this, and this will help explain a lot. I'd recommend watching this video with your student report prior to coming in and asking questions specifically related to them. I think most of your questions will get addressed here, and then we can dig in a little deeper if we meet to discuss your students' reports a little more specifically. So sit back and enjoy. The reason we do the videos is to make it easier for you so you can pause or rewind, or if a certain slide doesn't apply to you, you can go past it and watch it as many times as you like. So enjoy. I hope you find it helpful. So if you are the parent of a second or third grader, you will receive different reports than those who are in fourth grade and above. For second and third grade parents, you will receive what is called a primary grade parent report. Don't worry about how small these pictures are on the slide. We'll be blowing them up in a minute so you can look at them in more detail. The primary grade parent report will go through each subject and tell you whether they exceed, meet, or are still learning in different areas. The 4th through 8th grade reports, once your child's in 4th grade, will be much more detailed, and we'll go through those as well. In 4th through 8th grade, you'll receive 3 reports, one called an individual instructional summary, an individual subscore report, and an individual narrative report. Please note that for 2nd and 3rd grade families, the primary grade parent report is basically a narrative of this same data. So the first thing to talk about is the difference between when something says percent correct or percent mastery versus when something says percentile ranking. This is really key because these reports will have both, and both will be referenced, and they mean very different things. So let's go through when something says percent mastery or percent correct. When you see something that says percent correct, it's exactly as it sounds. It's just the percent that the student got correct out of a total. It's similar to what we're all used to seeing when we take any sort of classroom test. If they took a test out of 20 and they got 15 right, then they would have received a 75%, 15 out of 20. They got 75% correct. This shows no relation to the other students that took the test at all. It only shows how many they got right out of a total. So an example, an 84% would mean the student answered 84% of the questions correct. That's all it means. Percentile ranking is very different. Over on the right side of the chart, this tells you what percentage of the testing population they outscored. Thus, it's comparing them to the other students. Regardless of the score, the students are ranked, and it explains where your child fell within that population. So this is actually showing how your student's score compares to the population, and we'll talk about which population later. So, for example, 84 percentile ranking would mean that your child outperformed 84% of the other students that took the test within that specific norm group. And the remaining, or approximately 16%, outperformed your student. So as you can see, the percent correct on the left side of the chart in and of itself really doesn't give you much information for a standardized assessment other than how many they got right. For example, your child could have scored a 56% on a test. You might see that score and think, wow, that's not that great. But once you learn that that raw score actually puts them in a 92nd percentile ranking, you realize that that 50%, 56% was actually a great score. Or let me give a contrary example. Let's say your child got an 86% correct on a test, and you get that and you think, all right, that's pretty good. But then you look at the percentile ranking and you find out that that put them in 31 percentile ranking, meaning that even though they got 86% right on the test, that they're in the bottom 31% of the students in terms of the scores for that test. So you can see that they mean very different things, and they give you different valuable pieces of information. So I'd watch that slide again if there's any confusion there. That's a very important distinction. Now let's talk about stay nines. You'll see these on just about any standardized assessment, and the CTP-4 is no exception. Stay nines is simply short for standard nines, and it's a statistical method for actually scaling test scores. and it puts it on a 9-point scale where 5 is the average and there's a standard deviation of 2. So what this means is it's just a way to have a normal distribution that's divided into 9 intervals. We probably all had a class in the old days where we took a test and then it was curved. This is kind of like a curve in a sense where no matter what you got on the test, your stay 9 depends on where that falls with how everyone else did as well. So the mean or the average lies at the center of the fifth interval. Simplified, this means that the group being looked at is forced into a natural bell curve so that you can see how your child compares to the rest of the norm group. Why is this helpful? Well, because the raw score doesn't always tell the whole story. This may sound complicated, and it can get mathematically, but stay nines are very attractive to educators and families because it shows a simplified classification system. If your child is anywhere in the 4, 5, 6 range, then depending on the norm group they're being compared to, that means they're in the average. If they're in the 7 or 8 or 9, they're above average, and if they're 1, 2, 3, they're below average for that particular norm group. We'll also talk on a different slide about how the stay nines can fluctuate based on the addition of the test and a range of understanding of how that can fluctuate. So let's look at the first report. The first report is called the Primary Grade Parent Report, and it is for second and third graders only. Fourth grade and above will receive a different set of reports. So if you have fourth graders and above, you're welcome to fast forward through these if you'd like. The first report is called the Primary Grade Parent Report. It's a summary report that's narrative in form. If you look at the red circle, that'll tell you the title of the report. The red arrows are for each test, so main test section. For example, this page shows word analysis. Please note that with the primary, second, and third grades, there are no national norms. This is different from the Iowa, and thus they're much more narrative in form. If you look at each section, for instance, word analysis, it'll then go into each different type of thing that's tested. And what it'll show you is, in 3 different sections, what your child's test results showed that they exceeded expectations in, what it showed that they met grade level expectations in, and then what it shows if they are developing in any areas or areas that might be worth looking at. For those, we'll look at those along with the teacher to determine if there's any trends. It's not uncommon for a student to do well in an area one year, not in the next, and fluctuate some, but we do watch for trends. So if you notice that your child is in an area that's being marked as developing for 2 or 3 years in a row, then it's definitely something worth paying attention to. Also notice that although second and third grade families don't get similar reports as fourth grade and above, this form does show you the percent mastery of content in each area, which is similar to data that the older students do receive. So if you'll notice below sight words or below phonic analysis on this form, it does show what percent mastery your student did receive. And remember the difference between percent mastery versus percentile ranking. We'll now move to the first of 3 reports that fourth grade and above will receive. I'd encourage you, if you have second and third graders, to keep watching so you can see the additional amount of detail that gets provided as the students get older. It is called the Individual Instructional Summary Report, as you can tell by the red circle. I'm going to go through this report, and I put some red boxes up there with numbers so that you can see specifically which column I'm talking about. Hopefully you have your student's report out in front of you and you can follow along. First of all, the shaded kind of tan rows there are the actual main tests. So the 5 main tests that this particular student took: auditory comprehension, reading comprehension, etc. Please note again, this report, the instructional summary report, has no percentile rankings or stay nines on it. Everything on this report relates to percent correct, just the number they got correct. So let's go through each of these columns. In the column I have marked with box 1, that shows the number of students that actually took this test within our school. Box 2 is just like a test they might take in any class. It shows the total number of questions that were available for them to answer and the total number that they answered. This is really important actually because it tells you if your student's actually answering all the questions and finishing the test. This is a test where your students should complete all the answers, even if time's running out at the end and they just need to fill in bubbles, this is a test where you are not penalized for guessing, and students should complete all of them. So you can tell on box 2 if your students actually answered and fill in a bubble for all of the questions. Box 3, simply the percent they got correct. Using the numbers from box 2, numerator over denominator, it gives you their average that they got correct on each section. And now notice this report also has no national information on it. You're used to seeing national information, and we do exceptionally well nationally, but we've decided to challenge ourselves to a higher standard. So the next 2 columns, box 4 is suburban public. These are suburban public schools that choose to take the CTP-4. Most of these schools are East Coast, and they are all high-performing schools. It is not your typical public school that would choose and elect to take the CTP-4. These are high-performing schools who want to compare themselves to independent schools. And then box 5 is independent schools. Again, private independent schools who choose to take the CTP-4. So these are very high bars, and you can look at box 3, 4, and 5, or column 3, 4, and 5, and see how your child compares to the averages for those 2 categories. Please note that the shaded rows that are tan are the test as a whole, and then it breaks it down to their subcategories. So for instance, in the example on your screen, auditory comprehension is the test, and that, if you look at the shaded row, shows you how they did overall for auditory comprehension, and then it shows you the detail for each section of auditory comprehension, such as vocabulary and analysis and things of that sort. The student does not realize those subsections are in there. The questions within auditory comprehension are just in any sort of random order. It's the testing agency that then categorizes them and gives you the results in that way. And again, as a reminder, there's no percentile rankings or stay nines on here. So even though you can compare how many your child got correct as compared to the average in suburban public or independent schools, you can't tell where that puts them on the curve. But stay tuned for the next report and you'll see where to find that. The next report you'll get, if you're 4th grade and above, is the individual subscore report, as you can see in the top right corner. There's 2 sections to this, and they're different, so we're going to look at each one separately. Section 1, as you can see with the red box labeled 1, is a norm referenced groups, and Section 2 shows the percent correct in comparison to independent groups. So let's look at these each individually so they're easier to understand. And we'll start with the top of the report, which was the norm referenced groups. This is just a sample cut out of one, and as you can see, there's 3 groups across the top that we're norming with. One is the national norm group. This is all 50 states nationally, suburban, private, independent, public, every type of school you can imagine is in the national norm group. The independent school group is the middle column that's shaded there, just for reference here. And then we can also look at groups that are we're associated with, such as ACCS. Administration uses the national norm group on the left to ensure that as a school we are exceeding national norms for the types of schools that take this test. So you're used to seeing national norms on the Iowa, and we usually do very well and rank very high for national norm groups. But we now want to also look at independent school norm groups to determine areas of growth is related to the strongest of independent schools. Please, if you haven't seen the prior presentation or video number 1, that will help explain what types of school choose the CTP-4. We might also have the opportunity to use other school groupings, as you can see in the 3rd column, such as ACCS. ACCS is the Association of Christian Classical Schools. So staying on this report, let's look at the numbers. Now that you understand the difference between percentile rank and percentile, this is the first report where you'll actually see percentile rankings. So if you look at the one on your screen and you look at the very first row entitled Verbal Reasoning, this student in the national norm group has a 78 percentile ranking, meaning they outscored 78% of the students in their national norm group for their grade level, and they have a stay 9 of 7. If you look at their independent school row, for verbal reasoning, they outscored 41% of independent school students in their age group, puts them in a stay 9 of 5, and ACCS also 41 percentile rank. If your child has a stay 9 3 or lower, then it's worth paying attention to, and your child's teacher will be aware that they might need help in that area. Again, a single year doesn't always tell us anything, but we will find out. by watching trends. Now we'll go to the bottom of that same report, the individual subscore report, and look at the next section on that same page. If you look at the bottom, the bars, the kind of tan bars, they represent the average percent correct for independent schools for each of those subsections. Again, not percentile rank, but percentage correct. If you look at the blue arrow, it's pointing towards a bar. The diamond is actually your child. So it's just a pictorial representation of, for each detailed section, what percent your child got correct. Again, not percentile ranking. And then how that relates to the average for, in this case, independent schools. This whole bottom of the report is independent schools only. So you can see what percent your child got right and how it compares to the average child in his or her grade for independent schools. So staying on this report for a minute, as you can tell, diamonds to the right of the bar could identify possible strengths. They're outscoring the average independent school student. Again, it's a very high bar for the types of schools that are taking this test. So that's very impressive if you have bars or diamonds to the right of the bars, particularly if they're consistently staying there over 2 or 3 years of testing. The tests, again, are identified where I put red boxes around them here. The categories of each test are identified below them. And again, for instance, when the kids are taking verbal reasoning, the top test, they don't know the categories, and the questions aren't in categorical order. They're arranged by the testing agency after the kids take the test. So it breaks it down. You can see verbal reasoning overall, and then you can look at the 3 subcategories below it for more specific results. And the column just to the left of the bars and diamonds actually shows your students' percent correct that they got in each of those categories. The third and final form you'll get if you have a 4th grader or above is called the individual narrative report, as you can see in the top right corner. And there's 2 sections to this as well. The first section is norm reference group, and it's identical to what we already talked about on the norm summary sheet. So the top part isn't any different. The bottom part, however, relates to percentile rank for independent groups. This is the probable range for your child's rank within different editions of the test. So what does that mean? If you look at the bottom section where the arrow and the number 2 is pointing to, the diamond is your child's percentile rank, not percent correct, but percentile rank. And the box around it actually shows how much that fluctuates depending on different editions of the test. So for instance, if your child got a percentile rank of about a 43, they're showing you that that could fluctuate between a 23 and a 53 depending on the edition of the test. And it helps us remember not to overreact to any one particular score and more to watch for trends over several years. So if you have more questions about your score reports, first, of course, you'll want to contact your teachers. Unless you're a member of the pilot group, then you can contact me directly. But start with your teachers. School of Grammar, our director is Miss Abby Mayall, and our School of Logic is Mr. Matt Davis, so feel free to reach out to them. And then my email address is there on the bottom as well, so please don't hesitate to contact me if you have additional questions or if you'd like to sit down and go through these together. So thank you for making your way through this video. We hope it saved you a trip to campus for a presentation, and we hope the video aspect of it you found useful. Don't hesitate to contact us if you want to go into further detail on your students' reports, and we'd be happy to help you understand those. We appreciate your time and have a wonderful evening.